We already know our back routine. We're not going to practice that today. Tomorrow you guys will be able to incorporate this flowing into this, and you'll have a full posterior routine that you'll be practicing tomorrow. Today we are only focusing on the legs. You guys, when we are done with the demo, you will have, it's about 85 minutes each on the tables to just keep doing your legs. That's all we're doing today, okay? So typically, in the routine, I just finished up my back routine. I want to keep hands on the client as now I transition down to the lower leg. At this point, the bolster is already in. So I'm going to go ahead and just slide this back in.
I have not shaved.
Oh, that's okay. So funny. So you'll hear that often.
Yeah, one lady just came in this morning.
From clients, and honestly, you become so fixed on the muscles and the tissues and what you're doing that you have no idea whether they've shaved their legs or not, so you can assure your clients of that. Okay, so again, I'm transitioning down here. So I always want to start with the drape, of course, and starting down here by uncovering the foot first. And if you recall, I kind of went up to this point, exposed the back of the knee. I'm going to tuck just underneath the knee, and again, I'm tucking down into the table and back towards me, not up. So a nice tight tuck. And I am going to expose, so today we are working glutes. We want to expose the gluteal muscle, but not the gluteal cleft. So we're going to roll under. And then tuck. So I have a nice tight drape. Get this out of the way. Okay, I'm ready to begin.
All right, standing in the left bow stance, you're going to apply your lubricant.
Okay.
Being mindful, light pressure over the top of your
Yep.
fossa.
Yep. So this is going to be a little chilly. And I see you already have goosebumps.
Great.
Trying to warm it. Okay. So, body mechanics. I may have to adjust my stance so I'm at a good point where I'm hitting the entire leg. And then returning without having to take a step. For those people who are a little bit taller, you may have to take a little step to move forward. Okay, so it's really just one nice effleurage, two-handed, to cover the whole leg. And then,
Then you're going to two-hand effleurage 3 times.
okay, so this is part of the routine. So 1. And my hands are kind of running next to each other. This is the way I'm doing my hands. And that's mainly because I don't have a real wide area that I'm working with. Okay.
Next, you want to do the alternating thumb effleurage 3 times.
Okay. So when I get down here, I'm gonna, and does it say where? Does it say over?
It says, while applying pressure and grinding of the Achilles tendon, circle your thumbs over one another backward toward you. Twiddle thumbs.
Yep. So that move that we learned before with the twiddle thumbs or the alternate thumb effleurage, starting at the Achilles tendon, just running right up the center of the calf, keeping in mind my body mechanics. And that's just one time, correct? Or are there 3?
3 times.
Yep. And always return, you don't lift your hands off the client. You keep them on the client in some way, return them back to where your next starting line is. Okay.
Raking finger effleurage 3 lines, 1 times each, medial, intermediate, and lateral.
Okay. So a raking is going to be more, instead of gliding our thumbs, we are going to be more at an angle. So you see where my hand is here? That is a raking effleurage. So I actually have my hand lifted off the client a bit. but I'm still locking my joint. I'm locking my thumb. I'm not bending. I'm not doing grip like this. I am actually still keeping my joint as locked as I can with the angle. So 3 lines. This is the intermediate line, medial, intermediate, lateral. Okay.
Alternate hand pasteurizage, shifting stance into the warrior stance.
Right. So I return my hands. I am now shifting into horse or warrior. And I need a
Scoop
little-
and flush over the entire calf, 3 regions, medial, intermediate,
Right.
and lateral.
So petrissage down here is going to be similar to the petrissage that we did on the traps, where we're kind of gripping and releasing, and I'm alternating my hands. And as I'm doing that, my legs are making the motion to move my body back and forth. I'm not shifting, keeping my body in one place and twisting in any way. I am moving with my legs. So kind of getting the medial line, the intermediate line, and the lateral line. Okay.
Breaking finger effleurage, shifting stance back into the left bow.
Yep. So I shift back, my hands stay on the client, shift my stance back.
3 lines, 1 times each.
So I'm just repeating the step that I did before.
This is the one if you find taut bands or trigger points,
Mm-hmm.
hold each.
So right about here. Is that pressure okay? Okay. And right about here, gets a little tight. Not terrible, but if I was going to do a compression, just like I did up by the shoulder blade, I'm going to hold compression for just a few seconds and then circle my way out and move on. Okay, so those are my 3 lines.
You go back to alternate hand effleurage 3 times.
Mm-hmm. So alternate hand effleurage.
Just on the bottom, just on the calf, right?
Yeah, just on the calf, but then I think the next step is we're transitioning to the upper thigh.
Ironing effleurage.
Okay. So one thing I want to note real quick is as I transition from the lower calf up to the thigh, this is the popliteal fossa that we talked about. So this is an endangerment site that we have to be cautious of. We can still go over it in this case, but I'm not using any pressure. I'm just gliding my hand. Once I get up here and I'm on muscle tissue, then I'm going to add a little more pressure. So the sequence then is a little more pressure down here, lighter here, a little more pressure here. Okay, so now here comes the fun part. We get to use our forearms. So that is the ironing effleurage in your next step. So you want to make sure that their leg is well lubricated, but you might want to give a swipe on your arm real quick so your arm is going to glide. So checking my body mechanics, I am going to use my forearm, and I'm using this part of my forearm. So there's a little flesh there, there's a little, you can certainly usually feel the bone. You kind of want to use that as your ironing surface. And I'm doing 1 line with my right arm, obviously. So medial, intermediate. But then when I get to this lateral side, it's kind of awkward to try to do this because my hand is hitting the table. So I'm going to switch arms, and I'm going to do this lateral line with my other arm. Okay, so what's next?
Ocean waves pasteurizage, warrior stance.
Yep. So now I take my step forward, switch to warrior or horse, and ocean waves.
Opposing push and pull.
Yep. So I'm going in opposite directions, and as I'm coming up, I'm kind of lifting the tissue and just gliding my hands across. And I want to do this at different levels. So I'm starting a little bit lower, but not over this popliteal fossa. I am going a little bit above that and working my way up. Now keep in mind that as you start getting into a little bit high on the inside of the leg, on the medial portion of the leg, you're starting to get into a sensitive area. So you want to be really mindful of this drape that you created and not to tuck your fingers under that drape. So you may have to adjust your hand just a little bit. And as I'm doing this motion, I'm using my knees to raise and lower. I'm using my body mechanics. Everything comes from here. And if I have to shift back and forth a little bit, I'm still using my weight shifting from leg to leg. Okay?
Raking finger effleurage, you're going to shift stance back into left bow.
Yep.
3 lines.
Okay, so this is, again, I'm getting into that medial leg area. So what I usually do myself is I'm using my thumb with this hand, but then I'm following behind with maybe my middle finger and my ring finger on the other hand. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want to be sticking my fingers up underneath this drape in any way and getting close to any private area. So once I get to, that's mainly for the medial. When I get to the intermediate, I can go back to thumbs. And then medial. So the 3 lines.
2 hand effleurage, entire thigh 1 time to smooth and flush the transition onto glutes.
Yep. So now I'm coming up onto the glute. I'm going to just retuck a little here. These sheets are slippery. All right, so now I'm on the glute.
Ironing effleurage 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Palm of hand to the entire glute.
Okay. So this is where we get a little tricky. So here it says palm of hand on the glute. You never want to grab the glute with your whole hand, fingers included. So palm of hand you can do 1 of 2 ways. You can either use just this and extend your fingers and do your effleurage like that, or you can bend your fingers, which I can't bend mine real well, but if you bend your fingers, you can usually get a little bit better effleurage. So that's the idea. You don't want to have a whole hand on the glutes. You definitely want to have fingers extended. Okay, so after that,
Alternate fist ironing effleurage, warrior stance,
okay.
twisty fisty, drive the car, yin and yang.
Yep, okay. One more thing before I move on that I want to point out. We are working up towards the sacrum to the iliac crest and coming down. So similar to when we were doing circles on the posterior low back, how we work up. So up towards the glute and coming around. So twisty fisty, we are now going to make just loose fists, and we are going to alternate fists, knuckles onto the glute tissue, and you can kind of move around a little bit. So 1 twisting at a time. Okay.
Breaking finger effleurage, warrior stance,
Mm-hmm.
3 lines.
Yep. And what does it say as far as from where to where?
Starting at greater trochanter,
The trochanter. Mm-hmm.
like spokes in a bicycle or cutting a pizza.
Okay. So the greater trochanter, because you haven't learned this in anatomy yet, is this. It's actually the head of the femur, where it comes into the hip joint itself and creates the hip joint. So when I find that bony landmark, I'm going to work in 3 lines up towards the sacrum. So in my case, I like to use these fingers. You can also use thumbs, but you're keeping your hand off of the glute. Do you do it another way, Savannah? Or what fingers?
Typically just
Thumb.
thumbs and push.
Yeah. So I'm doing 3 lines. These sheets are really slippery. So one a little more proximal, intermediate, distal.
And it's all coming from the bone.
Yeah, I'm
the top of the
starting from
femur.
this general area. So you don't want to put pressure on the bone, but if you go just above it, you feel where you kind of fall off the bone, that's
Mhm.
your starting point. The thing is, again, this is Swedish massage, so pressure is kept very